All right, well, welcome everybody to LTU. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I don't need to welcome most of you to the campus, but for those of you who are new or haven't been here in a while, and those of you who may watch this in the future, welcome to the Black Spectacles ARE prep session. On behalf of Lawrence Tech University, I'm Dale Geyer. I'm the chair of the architecture department, and we're glad to have you here. Hopefully this will end up being very informative and useful for you guys. And we're looking forward to a really interesting session. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Newman and Chris Hopstock of Black Spectacles, who will introduce the program a little further.
Okay. So I'm Mike Newman. I'm an architect. So there's a very funny thing that's going to be happening here. For all of the younger folks in the crowd, you're like, who the hell is that guy? For all the just a little bit older folks in the crowd, they're like, I know that guy's voice because I've watched him for hours and hours and hours on video. And then for everybody who's a little older than that, it's like, who the hell's that guy? So it's a funny little stream of folks. So I'm Mike Newman. I'm an architect. I have a giant corporation, an S Corp of a firm of 2 whole people, which essentially my partner is now pretty much running. I teach at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. I teach also right now at IIT for funny reasons in Chicago. I've taught at a bunch of different places. I started a nonprofit, design build nonprofit with some friends of mine for Chicago teens. And I also weirdly, somehow, out of the blue, ended up becoming the content provider for Black Spectacles back as Black Spectacles first started. And so I did all the content for quite a while. And then they smartened up and brought in
Chris Hopstock.
Why don't you take it over?
I'm Chris Hopstock. I'm the Architect Education Specialist at Black Spectacles. You've probably never heard that title before, and I didn't either when I started at Black Spectacles. But I have 2 primary responsibilities there. The first one is ensuring that all of our content is accurate and it's backed up by NCARB approved resources. And the second is making sure that all of our content is teaching everyone what they need to know to pass the exams. And like Mike said, we're revamping a whole bunch of our video content. We've revised our CE course over the past year. We're currently working on PCM, and we're kind of going through the divisions as we go. Other than that, I'm a registered architect from New York for about 7 years now. I graduated 10 years ago, so I took a little under 3 years to pass my AREs. I primarily focused my work in New York City, doing a lot of multifamily residential projects of varying scales, from luxury high-rise housing down to supportive housing for formerly homeless veterans in my home borough of Brooklyn, and pretty much everything in between. So that's a little bit about myself. I'll pass it back to Mike, and we'll get started.
Okay, so what we're going to do here today is Chris and I are going to spend a few minutes just doing a kind of quick run through, talking about the ARE itself, the architectural registration exam. We're going to do a couple of just example kinds of questions, one for each of the different sections. We're going to talk about it generally just a little bit. We'll do that for 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to stop that and we're going to bring up some other folks, and we're going to make it more of a sort of round table discussion, angular table discussion, get your questions, get some other questions that I know some people have had. So in that line, we're going to start with some questions about the ARE. And the first thing that I just want to make sure that people kind of grasp the importance of, this is probably the most important thing to take away from this entire session, is while you're thinking about this, this is a monumental exercise you are about to get into. It's a big deal. It takes a long time. It's very meaningful, but don't panic. And the reason you don't need to panic is I got licensed. Eric got licensed. I mean, come on. He and I can get licensed. You can certainly get licensed. It is a huge deal, but a lot of people have gone through it. It's not that terrible. It's totally a kind of interesting and believable thing that you can do. And the other really cool aspect about it, and this is something I can absolutely guarantee you, is you will be a better architect after you go through the process. Now, the process itself, is anybody here from NCARB or anything? I hope not, right? All right, so the test itself is super irritating, right? It's just a thing you have to get through. You can complain all you want about it, it doesn't matter. Complain away, nobody cares, right? So it doesn't make any difference. The test, awful. Studying for the test, you are going to become a better architect. And I can absolutely guarantee it. And the reason I can guarantee it is because there's a bunch of topics that you have never actually done yet. You're working at a firm that does single family houses, or you're working at a firm that does high rises in China and you're doing the DD drawings or something like that, right? There's a whole range of other stuff that you never get to, and it's really hard to force yourself to look into those topics unless there's a reason. This is the reason. So you start looking at all those things that you haven't had a chance to think about: how contracts work, how relationships are, how do you build the business, how do you kind of actually run the process as you go through. So many things that you haven't had a chance to think about. It feels like a huge deal, but don't panic, it's gonna be all right. And I've said that to many people, and people come back to me all the time and say, you were right, I didn't panic, and it was fine. It'll be fine for you as well. You want to hit forward? All right, next thing, just a quick one I want to mention is find your resources. This may seem sort of obvious, but what my point is here is a lot of people go into this process and they start thinking about like, oh, I'm kind of by myself. I don't really know. I'm new at this firm maybe I'm working at, or maybe I'm still in school and I don't have any resources. I don't know where to go. You actually have tons of resources. You have faculty members who know a huge amount about this. You have people who you've worked with who are very, very knowledgeable. A lot of the firms have guidebooks and resources available to you that you can kind of use. And invariably, there's always somebody at the firm that you're working at or that you interned at some point. There was somebody working there that you were like, that guy knows a lot about the job site. I should just take them out to coffee and say, hey, I'm going to be taking the exam. What should I know? And every architect on the planet is going to want to help you get licensed. They're not going to go out of their way to say to you, hey, let me help you get licensed. But if you approach them, they are going to be helpful. Everybody wants that to be a positive experience for you. And if you say to somebody who's really good at something, you say, hey, you're really good at this, can I learn from you? They are going to be flattered and interested in helping you out. You have tons of resources that you don't even think about yet. So take a moment, take a piece of paper out and start writing down the different resources you have and start making those kinds of connections. There's way more stuff at your fingertips than you might think. And I bet Chris has some thoughts about some other resources that are available to you.
Well, I can't agree more, Mike. I was lucky at my firm that I had people just like you were describing. I was also lucky that my boss was willing to put me on projects or phases of a project that kind of aligned with my studies. So when I was studying for CE, I was doing a ton of site visits. So if you have the ability to do that at your job, I would definitely, it doesn't hurt to ask. So definitely go for it. When it comes to resources, I'm obviously a little bit biased about Black Spectacles, putting so much energy and effort into it. But what I will say about our product is it's not geared towards one type of learner or one type of test-taking personality. And I think a lot of the test prep providers out there, they kind of tell you, you've got to schedule all your exams in this 3-week period or whatever it is and study for all of them together in over 6 months, and that's the way to do it. And I don't think there's a single way to study for the exam. It's really dependent on who you are. So what I like about Black Spectacles is that we've got a ton of tools available that you can use depending on your personal situation with each exam. A couple of examples You know, if you're less experienced in a particular exam that you're about to take, maybe it's PA or CE, you know, you can really start with the videos and watch them through and through, watch the whole course, use our lecture slides as a guide, and then get into the exams and test yourself. Conversely, if you've got a lot of experience in something, even if it's CE, for example, you do a lot of site visits, you could start with a practice exam and then use the exam summary at the end to figure out where you're a little weak, and sort of watch certain videos and fill in your knowledge gaps there, take another test and see how you do. So I think that's all I've got to say about resources. Let's move on.
Next one. Oh, that's a different one. All right, sorry. My fault. So next, you have lots of resources. Some of those resources are your friends. I am ever grateful to the friends that took the exam at the same time I did, because that's how I knew to get going, how to, we all kind of got together, we did study groups, we did all sorts of things. But that was me and my friends, right? Find your group. Who are your people, and what is it about that group that is important to you? So one of the great things about taking this exam, taking this series of exams, is I one time joked that I was talking to a big group of people like this, and we were talking about it, and somebody asked a question, and I said, well, I mean, of course, you know, we get to see your scores, and we share them with all of your employers, and people were like, it took 10 minutes to calm everybody down afterwards, because people were so freaked out by the fact that somebody, nobody's ever going to see your scores. Nobody ever sees any of it. It doesn't matter. You could just decide, you know, I'm just going to go and take all of the exams and just see what happens. Maybe I'll pass 3 of them, right? Maybe you could. Why not? You could just try it. I mean, it costs money, of course, but there's some issues there, but you could just go do it. And then if you fail them all, who cares? You just learned a whole lot about how the exam works, right? Decide for yourself how involved you want other people to be. Do you need a bunch of cheerleaders kind of, you know, driving you to the exam and going, all right, you're going to do great. You look fantastic. You know, do you need that? Or do you want nobody to know? You're going to slide in on a Saturday and you're going to take this exam, and then you're going to pass it, and you're going to yay, I just passed this exam. And everybody's like, you took the exam? I didn't know you were taking the exam. Either way, whatever you want, but figure out what you want. If you need people with you, get people. There's people around, you know people going through this. If you don't know somebody directly, some friend of yours is also doing it, and it's a great way to start creating a network of people. Even if you're being quiet about it, there's probably still people you want to share resources with. Find your posse. Okay, in the last of this little section here, build your schedule. But be realistic about it, right? So a couple of important things to say. This is my favorite moment of these discussions that I get to say. I'm betting somebody else in the room is with me on this. You guys are going to be like, God, well, let's see, when should I schedule? Which one should I schedule first? And then do I wait a month, or do I wait 6 months to do the next one? How am I going to do this? I did it 9 exams, 4 days. Because that's how you had to do it back in the day. It was offered once a year. You signed up in March, and you took it in June. And literally 9 exams, 4 days. One of the days was a 12-hour drawing exam. So first of all, I think that gets us a little street cred. I think there's something about that. So I like mentioning that from that standpoint. But the other reason that I mention that is one of the kind of weird back things that happened, the unusual thing that happened, is they made it so you can schedule each individual exam on its own and at your own time scale, which seems like it's such a great thing. But then suddenly it's all on you. Like, the reason I'm a licensed architect, I say all the time, because my friend Ed called me up and said, you know, the deadline's tomorrow. You're going to have to wait a whole year if you don't sign up. And I was like, oh, damn, I got to go get the damn thing in. So I went and signed up, because otherwise I would have to wait an entire year. Well, you don't have that, right? So now you can take it anytime, which means you can also never take it, right? Because it just never happens. So what that means is you need to actually create that momentum. And the way to do that is to write down a schedule. Choose a schedule and literally write it down. Take a calendar, circle the days, figure out your game plan. There's a bunch of different possible game plans. You could do all in 1 week. Some of you may know Charlie Kletcha. He was the AIAS president a few years ago. He was a student of mine. He did this very public thing. He was like, all right, I'm taking all the exams in 1 week. And he did it very publicly. He was very nervous about it, let me tell you, and he passed them all. He had a whole live stream thing going. That's totally doable. Like I said, we did it 4 days. You can do it. It's not that hard, right? It's easy to fail something, but it doesn't matter, right? Or you can say, you know, I'm going to do one a month. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to study for 2 weeks. I'm going to take the exam. I'm going to take 2 weeks off. And I'm going to study really hard for 2 weeks. I'm going to take an exam. I'm going to take 2 weeks. All right, that sounds interesting. Maybe what I'm going to do is do 2 together that go well together, like project management and practice management. And I'll do those 2 in 1 week after spending 3 months studying for it. And then I'm going to take a month off. And then I'm going to take 3 months studying for the next 2. And I'll do 2. Whatever. Come up with a plan that makes sense for you. But you may notice I keep putting in things like take a week off, take a little time off here, because that's the be realistic part. If what you say is, all right, I am going to study every night for the next year, and so I get home from work and it's 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I make dinner, and then I'm from 7:30 to 10:30, I'm going to really, you're going to do that every night for the year? Like, you're not going to do that. Don't let yourself up for the fall. Don't create a situation that you're not going to want to do. So figure out the schedule that makes sense for you. Literally write it down, and that burns it in for you, and it starts making that like, all right, I said I was going to do it, now I've got to do it. If you just say it in your head, you haven't really said it. You got to write it down, and it forces your hand to actually make that happen. Now, here's another important sort of flip part to that. The second part to that is, if it's not working, make a new plan. Right? The plan is not to tie your hands. The plan is not to put you in handcuffs. The plan is to help you get going, right? So try a plan, see if it works, and then roll forward with it. Do you have more on that you want?
I don't think I could say it any better than you, Mike. I think now that you guys are all pumped up and ready to actually take the ARE, maybe we should just pop into some questions.
So tell you what, let's do one quick thing. I assume everybody knows this already, but there are 6 exams. The first 2, I think of them in this order at least, practice management and project management, are about sort of the issues of running an office, which is kind of interesting to have an exam on that if you think about it. It's a little bit of an odd thing to do from NCARB standpoint, but I think it's actually really useful for you. And then there's 4, and those 4 in a row are sequential. So there's first one is PA, which is about kind of early programming and analysis kinds of issues. Then there's PPD, which is kind of planning and kind of design development, essentially. It's not quite aligned with that, but essentially design development. Then PDD, which is essentially the CD phase of a project. And then CE, which is about construction. So we're going to do one question about each of those, and we'll kind of, hopefully that'll give you a taste of what's going on.
Yeah, we were joking earlier that it would have been a lot easier if they just named the divisions after the actual phases that they're about, but just goes to show you nothing about this exam is easy. So this first question is a question type that we've been noticing a lot on NCARB's practice exams. Some people call these mini case study questions. I call them refer to the exhibit questions, and it's a question where they provide either a chart or a drawing or something, an excerpt from the code that you have to use and in conjunction with the question itself to answer the question. So I'll read this one and then we'll go through it. An architect is organizing their financial statements and has a list of various expenses they must categorize. The architect is interested in understanding the minimum that they could charge in order to not lose money. The firm as a whole has a utilization rate of 75%. What is the firm's break-even rate? So, there's a little bit of a hint in this question, but the firm's break-even rate is what they could charge to not lose money. And the break-even rate is the overhead rate plus one. That plus one basically adds back direct labor, which we'll get to. So it looks like this firm was a little bit sloppy with their accounting, and they've got just this list of expenses that they've spent over the year. And the first step we're going to need to do is go through this list and determine what stuff here is an indirect expense and what stuff is a direct expense. Because the overhead rate is the ratio of indirect expenses to direct expenses. So we'll just go down the list here one by one. Office lease is a classic indirect expense. That's the amount that you pay for if you're renting your office. It could be, if you own the building, your mortgage. Definitely an indirect expense. Similarly, office equipment for $20,000 here. That's all your computers and your desks and your chairs and stuff. That's definitely an indirect expense. And benefits, medical insurance for your employees, stuff like that, 401ks, retirement plans, definitely an indirect expense. It starts to get interesting on the next line with salaries. Now, salaries include both direct and indirect expenses. And the way we're going to break this down here is by using the last line of the stem of the question here, which tells us the firm's utilization rate is 75%. That means 75% of this salary number is direct expense, and the other 25 is indirect expense. So I made the math easy here, but basically $100,000 is what we're going to add for the indirect expenses here out of that total $400,000. Moving down the line, $500,000 for insurance. $50,000. 500 is a lot for insurance.
500. What that means is that the insurance company really doesn't trust these people. Right? He's very untrustworthy. So
Yep.
going with $500,000.
Classic indirect expense. Consultant invoices. You might get this question wrong if you include consultant invoices in the indirect expenses. They shouldn't be. Indirect expenses are things that you pay for to run your office sort of on a recurring basis. Consultants, you hire them for a project, and the consultants' invoices are taken right off your gross operating income, right at the top of a PL statement. You subtract that and a couple of other things, you get your net operating income. Those are not included, and that was just a tricky thing that I added to this question to trip people up.
So what would be an example of a consultant?
If you classic consultants on projects are structural engineers, MEP engineers. If you're designing a complicated project, you might have an acoustical consultant, landscape designers, lighting consultants. The basic consultants that you'll hire are the structural and the MEP. That's under basic services. Anything else would be an additional or supplemental service, I should say. And again, all of that is project by project, so it's not an indirect expense. Last thing is accounting and legal, pretty straightforward, and that is an indirect expense. So what we need to do here is add up all the numbers I circled plus $100,000 of the salaries to find out our total indirect expense. And I need to cheat a little bit because I can't do the math off the top of my head, but that adds up to $405,000. Oh, sorry. It's really hard writing on these things as a lefty in particular. So those are our indirect expenses. And like I said, the overhead rate is the,
So just while this is, because you gotta get a couple jolts. You have to get a couple jolts into the computer before it'll restart. When you're looking at that, some of you are probably like, what the hell is he talking about? But that's the whole point, right? The point is you look at that and you go, well, there's a couple of words, a couple terms in there I don't totally get yet. You start writing those down, you're going to start seeing them over and over. There's not that many of those kinds of things, like utilization rate, the direct and indirect. These things will show up over and over again because they're core parts of how you put something like this together. But like, when would you have ever seen that before, right? This is the moment where you're seeing it, and now you can say, all right, I remember that. Now I can start to look it up and find those things, and you'll see them a few times, and it'll make sense.
Yeah, and the thing I was going to say about this question at the end is that this question really, you need to know a good number of things to get this question right. And that's pretty common of the questions I'm seeing from NCARB these days, is they're not just going to ask you a question, what does utilization rate mean, where you just need to know this one piece of information and you'll get it correct. It's going to be more of a scenario-based question like this, where in this question, you need to know how to take a salary and figure out direct and indirect expenses. You need to know what is an indirect expense, and you also need to know how to calculate the break-even rate. Those are 3 things right there. So while we're on the topic of PCM, I think it's really important for that particular exam to internalize what these 10 to 12 different terms mean. And I wouldn't do that by trying to memorize a formula for what those are. I think that's a pitfall. Like, I don't even necessarily remember the formulas for all of these things, but I know what they mean, and I can figure out what the formula is based on that. So in this question, for example, it asks you what the break-even rate is, but if you think about what break-even rate is, it's exactly how much money you need to make to break even, to not lose money but not make money. So there's no profit in that number, but you've got to pay for, there we go.
Almost all of it. 405.
405, yep. All right, I'm not going to rewrite everything I wrote except for the 405 number. So anyway, if you remember where we were, 405 is the indirect expense, and I was explaining earlier that the salary number, the 400,000 here, if you multiply that by the utilization rate, that'll get you the direct expense. And basically what that means, what utilization rate means, is it's the amount of time that the architects in your office are spending on billable work. So if you multiply that by their total salary, you find the direct labor cost. That's another easy calculation to do here. $400,000 times 0.75 is 300,000. And I'm going to write units here, and I would get in the habit of writing units when you're using the whiteboard on the exam. And then simply we're going to divide those 2 numbers, and we're going to come up with a ratio. That ratio is 1.35, which is an answer choice here. So you might think you're done. That's another trick, and you'll see that a lot. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something.
No, I'm just going to get rid of that for you.
Oh, thanks. Just because you see an answer choice that you've arrived at during your calculations, don't think you're done. Think this through. If you remember from the beginning, I was saying that the break-even rate is the overhead rate plus 1, right? So this number is actually the overhead rate. We've got to add 1.0 to it to get 2.35, which is another one of these answer choices, C here. And that's the correct answer. The last thing I'll say about this one is the 2 other incorrect answers, 1.85 and 2.85, you would arrive at those if you added the consultant invoices to the indirect labor. So, to the indirect expenses. So you'll often, when you get a multiple choice question, the answer choices are usually numbers that you could conceivably arrive at if you make one small mistake.
So you can see that practice management, there's really the focus is going to be on all things generalized about a practice, like how do you organize a firm, how do you have insurance, how do you get consultant teams and things like that. And then you can get to project management, which is very similar. And in fact, often there are questions that could be literally in either one of them. But with project management, it's now more focused on a specific project. And so it's timeline of a project, what kinds of contracts make sense for certain kinds of typologies, things along those lines. How do you take a group of people from your firm who all have different levels of experience and billing rates? How do you put them together and figure out who's going to work on a project? So this one, it says, an architect has been working on a new layout for a lawyer's office when some new information comes to light from the building's owner, and the law firm asks for the updated fee for the architectural contract. The architect figures that the new information will require 50 hours of Ben's time, along with 10 hours of oversight by Jen. Ben makes an hourly rate of $40. Jen makes an hourly rate of $60. The firm uses a multiplier of 3.5, and the work is being performed in a moderately priced city that is a mid-sized city. How much extra should the architects charge for the amount of work? So we have two people doing the extra amount of work. We have Ben, and Ben is doing 50 hours of work and is making $40 an hour. And we have Jen, and Jen is doing 10 hours of work and is making $60 an hour. And so you might think, well, okay, I just multiply 50 times 40 and get that number, and then 10 times 60 and get that number. But that's actually not the number, right? Because the number you need is not how much are we paying those particular people, just them alone. We have to pay everything. We got to pay for the rent, all those other costs that Chris was just talking about. We've got to pay for the travel time. We've got to pay for the very fancy coffee machine that we've got in the office. We've got to pay for the masseuse who's coming in and doing. You have to. All of the other stuff has to get paid for somehow. Plus, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that you're doing that nobody's paying you for. So that has to get covered. So for example, maybe you're doing a proposal. Well, nobody's paying you for a proposal. You got to do the proposal. Or maybe you're doing a design competition. Well, nobody's paying you for that. You're just going to do that, and maybe you're doing it for marketing reasons. So there's reasons to do it, but nobody's paying you for it. So the costs of that have to get covered somehow. So that's what the 3.5 multiplier is all about. So the concept there is you have the cost of somebody doing the work, and then you have a multiplier. You multiply that out, and that is now the billable hour, the billable rate for that person. So in Ben's case, that would be 140, I believe. Is that right? And that one, let's see, what's that, 210? So instead of multiplying 50 times 40, I'm multiplying 50 times 140, and I'm getting 7,000. And I'm multiplying 10, not times 60, but by times 210, and I'm getting 2,100. So that answer is 9,100. And the reason this is one of the kinds of questions you would get is just like Chris was just saying, like the concept of a multiplier is pretty straightforward. Like you need to cover all of those other costs. You need to cover insurance. You need to cover rent. You need to cover the fact that they're going to pay for you to get licensed. You need to cover all of those kinds of things. But the only way that you're getting paid as a firm, generally, there are other ways, but the general only way that you're getting paid as a firm is by saying, okay, we've worked for 10 hours on this project, we're billing you per hour of the amount of time we've worked, and you're paying us that money. That money is covering the people, the rent, the everything else. So the multiplier and the billable hour are the two things that drive the vast majority of architecture firms in the country. It's an interesting little moment there, since we're on a university campus. It's intriguing to note that what that means is the entire concept of the industry of architecture is, can you design quickly? Can you do something in a short period of time? Because time is money. And in the university setting, there's almost never a discussion about, well, you shouldn't really, like, maybe it doesn't make sense to restart that project because just you don't like, you should just go ahead and, like, here, you're going to be constantly restarting and starting from scratch. Out in the world, no client will ever want you to start from scratch. Nobody wants to pay for 100 hours worth of work and then have you throw it away. So the whole concept of the industry of architecture is you have as good an idea as you possibly can, and then you just make it better and better and better as you develop the drawings. So that's what you're trying to do. That's what this question is talking about, is that idea of the billable hours. It's based on time, and the very unusual little thing that takes a lot to get into your head is time is money. That's obvious. Everybody knows that. But different people's time are different amounts of money. So if you have $100,000 to spend on a fee on a project, do I put a whole bunch of the principal's time on there and they're charging a whole lot per hour? Or do I put all as much as I can on the interns who are not very experienced and are going to take a lot of time? That's a huge balancing thing that takes years to really get to know how to do. You don't need to know how to do all of that. You just need to be able to recognize it in a question like this.
Yeah, I think another interesting thing about that question is it could have easily been rephrased to be a practice management question if that was, that is to say that you need to know, there's a lot of overlap between those exams. You might need to know a lot of the same things. So if that question was asking you, what should your fee be for a whole project, or what should your fee be for a supplemental service at the beginning of a project, that could have been a practice management question. So let's move on to this PA question.
So this is like the programming phase. You've just gotten the project. It's very early on in the time.
And a pretty classic question of like, where should I put the building? I mean, that's usually where you start with a project of where should I put it, and kind of like what should the massing be? How should I arrange the parking? Those really early preliminary decisions that you make about a project. So an architect is designing a 9-unit housing complex on a 5-acre greenfield site. The project's currently in schematic design, and the architect's evaluating strategies to minimize disturbance to the site's natural drainage. Which of the following design alternatives would least impact the site's existing drainage patterns? I think there's a few ways you could go about this question, but I'm going to walk you through the way that I think makes the most sense. I think if you try to read all of these at once and compare them all at once and find the best answer, it's going to be a little bit confusing because each answer here is a different scenario and there's a couple of different variables. Is it a single family home situation? Is it a multi-family is it 3 stories, 2 stories? And then you've got how is the parking arranged? And finally, where is the parking? Like that's a lot of stuff to think through all at once. So what I like to do on a question like this is to fully understand the first choice, maybe draw it out, which I'll do in a second, fully understand the second choice, and then compare those two to each other. Find the best one out of those two, then move on to the third choice, find the best choice out of the first best one, and now C, and so on and so forth until you arrive at a correct answer. So choice A here, and one more thing that I'll say is that I think some people might approach this question and try to apply some math to it and start saying, well, a unit might be 1,200 square feet, and I can maybe 300 square feet per parking space I can do, and try to solve it mathematically. Don't do that for this type of a question because there's simply not enough information. Like they can't expect you to assume how big these units could be. They could be 5,000 square foot apartments. They could be 500. Who knows? So it would be unfair to go about it that way. So always think about the question when you start, like, am I thinking about this the right way? And do I have all the information to think about it that way? So with that, let's just draw a rectangle for the site here, because we just know that it's 5 acres and we don't really know the proportions of the site. And I'm going to do my best to draw this to scale here, but it's probably going to be challenging. So bear with me here. But 9 single-family homes with a group parking facility, which is located on the front lot line of the site. So maybe that's like a group parking facility here that you go in and out, and there's parking spots like that. And then you've got 9 single-family homes. Those are probably going to be dispersed around the site. It's hard to talk while counting. I think that's 9. And you would have like walking paths between the houses and the parking facility. You can see that gets kind of big, and there's a good amount of impervious surface here compared to undisturbed soil. So that's choice A, and I think it's helpful to label the choices. And then we'll move on to choice B, which is 9 single-family homes with attached one-car garages 10 feet from the public way. And I'm just assuming that this is the public way here in all of these examples. So we've got 9 single-family homes, 3, 4, 5. But they're each going to be a little bit bigger, and I'm not going to draw each one, but they're each going to have a garage attached to the side of it and a driveway to that garage. I would say, looking at these two, that B might be the best answer. I think A, you could probably also locate the houses a little bit closer to that parking facility, but I'm not sure that there's a clear winner. I'm wondering if there's a best choice here. I would probably go with a group parking facility because I think that would be less paving in general than A. So I'm going to cross out, then B, sorry. So I'm going to cross out B. Now that I've eliminated B, I've got A as my front runner, and I'm going to compare that to C. So same thing, I'm trying to keep the variables as limited as possible and draw the site the same way. We've got 3 3-story, 3-unit townhomes. The 3-unit part doesn't really matter. That's a lot of 3s in there. But 3 3-story buildings with a group parking lot 50 feet from the public way. So I'm going to draw the group parking lot about the same size that I drew it in A, just to be fair. It's probably got an in and an out. And 3, these little footprints are going to be bigger than those single-family homes, but not by much. And I think C is already looking a lot more compact than A. So I think I'm going to eliminate A here and have C as my front runner and compare that to D. Really quickly, D is pretty similar, but it is a 2-story multifamily building, so it's going to be a bigger footprint than C, with a group parking lot 40 feet from the lot line, so a little bit closer. And I would say 2-story multifamily building is probably going to be pretty big. And comparing these two to each other, I think that C is the winner here. Again, this isn't really to scale, but I think the point is that the difference between C and D is 10 feet of paving in how close the parking lot is going to be to the public way. But 3-story buildings are going to be a more compact solution in terms of impervious surface than 2-story buildings. So I would eliminate D and go with C.
So there you are. So the answer there is then C, and this is one of those classic examples where you might actually literally draw it out, or you might just draw it in your brain, depending on like what kinds of things you're trying to do. But it's really about the approach that Chris was just doing, which is kind of taking each answer seriously, trying to determine what are the benefits of that answer, and then comparing them after you've done that as a process. For a question like that, that's really the only way that you can go through it. So I think that gives you a kind of a good idea about kind of what sort of things you're analyzing on this exam. This would be the moment where I say, remember I said the exam is completely ridiculous? That's a completely ridiculous question, right? It's clearly a ridiculous question, but this is the kind of question you're going to get. So get over it. It's too bad. It's a ridiculous question. But that's what you're going to have to, that kind of thing is you have to deal with. And the main point was, if it doesn't tell you something, it probably doesn't want you thinking about it. If it doesn't tell you the size of the units, you probably shouldn't be thinking about it, right? All right, let's go to the next one here. All right, this is PPD, Planning and Development. The client, a local private school, wants the designers to encourage the cooling effect of natural ventilation for a small gymnasium on campus. The architect should propose which of the following: make sure the large windows are concentrated on the north-facing side, add an associated greenhouse, use a heat sink material to pull heat away from the building users, high clear-story operable windows in combination with low operable windows. All right, what do you think? What's the obvious answer? Somebody, come on. Give it a shot. Yell it out.
Not the licensed architects.
Yeah, well, especially not them, because you don't want them to make the mistake of yelling out the wrong. All right, so here's our gymnasium. Here's our little sweaty junior high people playing basketball. There's a ball. And they're generating heat because that's what we as people do. We are exuding sweat and heat. We are the main thing that our bodies are really good at. That heat is going to sort of start to rise upward because warm air rises. If I can have operable windows or vents, doesn't have to be a window, but in this case it says windows, down low that I have the ability to open up, I can bring in fresh air, but I'm not going to really bring very much fresh air in unless I also have high operable windows, in this case clear story windows, that is going to let out the hot air. And so as that hot air lets out, it's going to create a vacuum behind, and it's going to pull the low air in. Even if the low air isn't that much cooler, the sheer fact that it hasn't been around the sweaty kids playing basketball, it will be less humid air, and it'll come in and be able to take some of that hot humidity up and away. So the answer here is D. Using stack effect, a convective stack effect, I'm able to use the fact that heat rises, just it naturally does, and I can let that heat out, and it will create a natural cooling effect by bringing air right through. That's a completely reasonable answer. If it had talked about it a little differently, we might have said if there was a prevailing wind, if that had been in, or prevailing breeze, if that had been in the question and we knew that direction, I could put, say, windows directly across from each other, and then that prevailing breeze would blow through, and that would be a way to do it. But without the prevailing wind information, it's not telling us that. What the best logical choice would be using the stack effect out of those four choices. But like Chris was saying a second ago about some of the other ones, each of these actually has some potential impact on natural cooling. Adding a greenhouse seems a little weird because that you would think would be adding all about heat, but you can actually use the heat because the hot air rises. You can use the heat that you generate from a greenhouse to actually pull air up and out and through a building. So that is a potential answer. It's just that it's a way more complex answer and just doesn't make sense. The better answer is D. Using a heat sink to pull heat away. That's also a potential answer. There's all sorts of situations where people do that. But again, it's just too complex. You don't need to get into it. There's an easy answer that is the better answer. One of the things that is often true is there will be multiple correct answers. The question is, which is the most correct? And in this case, that would be D.
So that was a good PPD example where you're making these design development decisions about a project. You've kind of already got the gymnasium idea, and you're thinking about what design strategy you can use to solve a specific problem. When we get to PDD, we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the design of something, and in this case, applying some codes to the design of a ramp here. One thing I'll say about this is that I think a lot of people have this expectation that if you're going to need to use some code information to answer a question, that it's going to be provided to you either in a case study or in one of those exhibits on a question, and I wouldn't rely on that happening. There's certain pieces of code information that you definitely should commit to memory. This question, you're going to need to know about 1 to 12 ramps, and you're going to need to know that a ramp can only, or 1 to 12 ramp, can only have a maximum of 30 feet run before you need an intermediate landing. Commit those types of things to memory. Don't go memorizing the height and area codes and occupant loads for different spaces, but these basic code things definitely commit to memory, and not only for the ARE, but in your practice also. You don't want to look up those things every time you need to design something. You should just know them. So In this question, a project architect is designing an accessible ramp for a municipal building and is reviewing the design parameters with a principal at the firm before getting started. By the way, that whole sentence is pretty irrelevant to the question. So you'll see that a lot also. It just takes time to read and it gets you wondering, do I need this information? But
Red herring.
yeah, red herring, but you don't need it. So the finished floor of the building is 35 inches above the parking lot and the ramp will connect the two. The ramp will be constructed of dimensional lumber and will extend to the paved parking area, which will act as the bottom landing. What's the minimum run of the dimensional lumber ramp? Round to the nearest foot. So I'm going to draw this in plan and section really quickly. That's our building.
While you're doing that, I'm going to say, obviously, a ramp is 1 to 12. It's 35 inches tall, so it's clearly going to be 35 feet, Chris. Clearly. Is that right? Why is that wrong? Loud, yell it. I've got a 30-inch, I can't go higher than 30 inch before I have a landing. And so the fact that the question is 35 inches specifically to see if you caught that, right? It could have been 32, it could have been 37, but it's not going to be 29, right? The whole point is that you already know 1 to 12. The question is, the whole question is, do you realize there's another layer to it?
So there is one more layer to it also, is that you need a landing at the top. You know, the question says that we've got a landing, we're going to use the paved parking surface as the landing, so that in the plan here would be like this area here. We're not going to include that in the calculation, but we do need a landing here, and we need a landing somewhere in the middle that makes one of the ramp runs, that makes both of the ramp runs not greater than 30 feet. So basically when you draw that in plan on the bottom is what it looks like. And then you've got a landing, a ramp, a landing, and a ramp. So we know that these landings need to be 5 feet minimum in length. That's to allow for either a circular turning radius or a T-turn. And that's the same for the landing at the top or the landing in the middle. So that's an extra 10 feet. And like Mike said, it's pretty simple math here. If you know 1 to 12 and you have the number of rise in inches, you can easily just say 35 inches equals 35 feet, and you have your answer. That can be divided any way you want here. Like I said, it could be 30 feet and 5 feet. Doesn't matter. We'll do it that way to make the math simple. So you got 3 5s is 15, and a 30 makes 45 feet. And it's as simple as that.
Cool. As simple as that. All right, so one quick riff on that. With that, what else would I have to build with that ramp? Handrails. I'd have to build handrails. Let's say you're like, God, I really don't want handrails. Like, it's going to look so ugly. I'm against handrails. How long is the ramp then? Now you've got to use, it has to be a lower slope than 1 to 20 because that is now not an accessible ramp. It's just a little bit of slope. Like it shifts out of the range of what's considered accessible, right? So knowing a few of those things, you can answer a lot of questions. And the trick there is not to try to memorize everything. It's really just seeing things that show up over and over again. You should know the size of a 2x4. You should know, things like that are just going to show up. Those are things you should know anyway. This is a good example of that. Okay, last one on this little section here, CE, the construction evaluation. Most of us in the world of architecture would call that CA, construction administration. During the construction of a private school, perhaps the same private school, the owner gets a donation to add a small snack bar for sports events. The immediate concern is getting the appropriate plumbing in before the concrete slab gets placed. The GC understands the time-sensitive need, but is unable to produce a final cost for the change of work for another month because they have previous commitments. Their estimating team has previous commitments. How should the architect proceed? So the obvious answer here is take the GC into the back room and slap him around a little bit. Because, like, come on, you need an answer here. That's ridiculous. I am, of course, joking because every GC I know could easily slap me around, and it would be kind of a useless thing to do. So let's try what the actual answers are here. Create a change order without the cost information. Sort of change order, that sounds plausible. That's sort of part of the deal here. 2, start a mediation process as noted for disputes in the A101 contract. The A101 is the sort of main body contract that goes between owners and contractors. Issue a constructive change directive. That sounds intriguing. Find another contractor who is able to provide the required cost estimate, presumably meaning in time. All right, what do you think? Anybody got an answer? What was that? CCD? Construction Change Directive? What the hell's a construction change directive? So you can use it when things change, and it says, let me take over for a minute. Yeah, all right, so what's going on here is what you really want is a change order, right? A change order is when there's a change to the contract, right? And when you change the contract, there are 3 components to it. One is the scope of the change, one is the cost of the change, and the other one is the time impact of the change. I have to have those 3 things, because those are the essence of a contract. Contracts are many, many, many pages long, but the core, the essence of that contract are those 3 elements. What is the scope? How much is it going to cost? When's it going to get done? So if I'm going to have a change order, I need to have all 3 of those things represented. Now, it might well be that one of them is 0, like there's 0 change in time, but I still put 0 change in time. It may be that there's 0 cost change, although that's never the case. It's always up. But it would just say $0 then, because you have to have all 3 referenced in a change order. So if we're changing the contract, you need a change order. The trouble is, what do you do when you can't get a change order? And what you do, and I can tell you're the person to hire to do it, is you stand up on the site and you say, listen, damn it, you're just going to do the work, and then we'll haggle it out later. And that's what a construction change directive is because sometimes you just can't get it fast enough. It doesn't make, it doesn't make sense to say, well, let's go into arbitration while the concrete contractors are sitting there with a full truckload of concrete, and they're like, we got to pour this stuff out in the next 45 minutes. Like, what are you talking about, right? There's no time for that. Arbitration is going to take 6-8 months, something like that. Mediation would take 6 or 8 months. Arbitration will take maybe 2 years. Litigation could be 5 years, 10 years, right? There are certain things that it just doesn't make sense to do in that way. And so what you have to do is you have to sort of roll the dice and say, okay, I believe we're going to be able to figure out what this price is later, but I am telling you we need to put those pipes in. This is a construction change directive. You go forward. It will eventually become a change order once you have all of the information. It's a really unusual little moment because you should never have work being done where you don't know what the cost is going to be. It's a terrible, terrible idea, and yet it's a complicated business. Sometimes you have to do terrible things in those moments in order to make those things actually work, right? So there's many, many examples. This is actually probably the nicest example. Like, I've done questions like this many times. Usually the situation is the contractor says, I'm just too tired of working on this. You want a change order? Sure, I'll do that for you for $200,000. I'll add that, toilet into that room or something. You're like, that's crazy. That's not. It's like construction change directive. We'll take it to arbitration. We'll take it to mediation down the road. I'm sure we'll win that bet. It doesn't matter. It's built into the contract. They have to then move forward. All right. The point of all of this was to just give you a little taste of the kinds of issues that show up on the exam and how you start to think about them. It's, obviously something like this is not going to tell you how to take the exam in full. It's just to sort of get you that, like, what are the kinds of things I want to do? And once you start reading about this stuff, you're searching for those words, the utilization rate and the, things like that, and pulling those out and making lists so that you can start to look up the things that you don't know. A huge amount of it you already know, you just may not know it in the way that the exam talks about it. And so don't get pushed over by anything that sounds tricky or anything like that. It's not that hard. As I said, we were able to pass it, and if we can pass it, you can pass it. So
I was going to say that I think they're all set after tonight and wasn't even sure if they needed black spectacles after this. But if you think you do, here's a 30% off discount code that you can use. I promise this isn't a sales tactic, but I don't know when that expires. It's probably in about a month. But, if you're interested, you can check us out at blackspectacles.com. We've got, I'm not a salesperson on our team either, by the way, so I'm going to do my best at this. But we've got a variety of membership options, different tiers, and you could sign up for a month, you could sign up for 6 months, a year, whatever best suits your study style. So
I have nothing to sell you. So all right, I think we're going to shift over into a little bit of a different kind of discussion, just kind of answer a few questions, and then probably give everybody the end of the process here. So who's coming up?
this one?
Yeah, sure. All right, awesome. Yeah, so we have a panelist of recently licensed architects, but also, I think, are you on the panel? No? Oh, okay. And I'm also on my path to licensure. I'm Nicole Tischler, if you don't know me. So I'll be kind of moderating the panel, but I first want to open up the floor to you guys and have some questions of them regarding maybe like studying habits or any kind of questions that you've run into so far. So I'll run around with the mic. So raise your hands if you have questions. Cool.
Hi, I'm Eli. What would you say to a student who's in the IPAL program and his firm doesn't offer Black Spectacles access and maybe can't afford, even with the 30% off membership? Is there a way to get access to what Black Spectacles has to offer at either cheaper or some sort of partial way?
Well, the first thing you should say is, I bring in the discount code, so now you guys should pay for it.
That's a tough position to be in. I would, I would try to talk to somebody at your firm and see if you can get on a firm membership. That's, we always say, you can get Black Spectacles and have your boss pay for it. That's probably the best case scenario for everyone involved. Better for us also, to be totally honest. But yeah, I can, if you want to talk later, I can put you in touch with the right people at Black Spectacles who can do a great job trying to sell it to your boss and getting them to pay for it for you. To be totally honest, I studied without Black Spectacles. I would say that I took the hard way about it, of just reading books and trying to figure out on my own. This was also, 7 to 10 years ago, so Black Spectacles was hardly existed back then. And that was a tough road to take, so I totally feel your pain. It is nice to have sort of a path to follow and not wonder constantly, am I studying the right thing? That's the worst thing to do, is spend an hour studying and you don't even know if it's going to be on the exam. Which way?
One thing you could do is also say to your boss, hey, you're investing in the future of the firm. Let's talk about ways that we could amortize the cost of this over my testing period, or let's just say a year after I finish testing. And so I think there are ways to address a hard no with negotiation alternatives. And so I think stay open. Don't make it a yes and no. Find ways to come up with options.
That's a much better answer. I was going to say arm wrestle them for it. But the point being that getting that kind of resource into the office is actually a really useful thing, not just for you, but for actually potentially lots of other folks. That's one of the reasons why talking to the folks at Black Spectacles, they'll give you a bunch of like how people use it in other firms. And there's a whole big wide range of stuff on there that's useful in all kinds of different ways. So it's a great system to do. But even if not, you know, you can just do it individually and do it for a limited time. Just think about when you want to do it, or, you know, like there are ways that you can find, you know, to make this sort of work for you. And not everybody is going to be focused on the videos. Like a big chunk of it is just having access to all the tests, the mock exams. The mock exams are a huge advantageous thing to have, because you really start to get a feel for what kinds of things people are asking. If you're just reading like the mechanical and electrical equipment for buildings, the MEB book, if you're sitting down at night and reading that, like, you know, first of all, you're sleeping pretty well probably, but second of all, you just don't know what to pull out of it. Once you have gone through some practice exams, it's going to start becoming clear what kinds of things are they asking. And this is probably a good point to sort of mention. We didn't mention it earlier, but I think it is worth saying. It's important to know what the point of the exam is. And the point of the exam is, are you competent? It is not, and I repeat, not about, do you know how to design beautiful buildings? If the word beauty comes into your mind while you're taking an exam, you should probably just get up and walk out, right? It's the wrong way to be thinking, right? It is about competency and simplicity. In fact, one of the things that's really interesting about it is that the exam is focused on people with 1, 2, maybe 3 years of experience. That's the sweet spot of who's supposed to be taking the exam. If you're going in straight while you're in school, for the right person, that can be awesome. If you have a little bit of experience, that's great. If you have some background, this school I know has a lot of sort of focus on that, and that's great. But it's really focused on people who have been in the world of architecture for a short period of time. If you go in to try to take the exam with a lot of experience, I'm looking at you, it's tricky, because you're now bringing all that baggage with you, and when you get a question on something like a contract or something, it's hard not to just see it as like, oh, it's a contract. Okay, it's 2 people, fine. You start seeing it as, oh, I remember I had a contract like that 5 years ago, and it was a nightmare, and like you're bringing all of that into it. And that's actually not helpful. You have to battle yourself to keep that out. This is my little plug for get it done. Don't wait 10 years. Don't wait 15 years, because it's going to be the right time to do it is right after school, within a couple of years. That's the sweet spot. It's going to be easier and better. And that's what you're telling the folks in your office is, now's the time, now's the sweet spot. Now is when I can become a much better architect by doing this, and I can be a better architect for you, and you're going to get something out of this, as well as the next person who you're hiring, because you're doing well, so you know you're hiring somebody, so they're going to need it as well. That's the way you're talking to them about it. And then the arm wrestling.
Yeah, so I was really lucky to work for a company that really supported me in my licensure process. But I didn't have black spectacles. So I used, and I mean, what a luxury to have that, and to have someone kind of explaining to you and graphically or visually be able to see a lot of that. But I use those thick ballast textbooks that are kind of a nightmare, but you know, that works too. So not everyone has the resources necessarily to use this software. It definitely makes it easier. But you can do it the old-fashioned way with textbooks too. But I would reiterate what everyone's saying here. Like, if you're licensed, your firm is gonna be able to make more money off of you. So like, they should be doing everything they can to help you get licensed. So I would definitely have that conversation with them about, okay, if I don't use this software, maybe it's gonna take this time, or you know, like create a negotiation strategy possibly. But the company I worked for was like, we have these textbooks, that's what you need, get it done, you know? So it can be done, but it's definitely easier with black spectacles.
The textbooks are great, right? I mean, there's lots and lots of information out there, and it's totally usable. You can totally do the textbooks. It's just that there's other ways to do it as well.
It's just a lot of reading.
Yeah.
I just want to say too, you guys, I didn't introduce you two, so maybe you could say something about yourself and your background quickly.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Kowalczyk. I work for Smith Group. I've been there for a year. and I was with Albert Kahn Associates before that. I went to LTU, and I taught adjunct comp design and ID5 here for a couple semesters. And I got licensed maybe 5 years ago.
Down here. You know me from teaching at Lawrence, Eric Ward. I got licensed at age 30, actually, 3 years after I finished my graduate degree, because I took some time off between undergraduate and graduate. So I think the timing issue is an important one. You've come out of school, and I think I want to definitely cue on what you said about it being a way to rise to a level where you can see farther from whatever, learning all this information, you kind of compacting it and feeling like you own it in some sort of way. That's Trent and I were discussing this too. It's a feeling of ownership. I really own this information now, and I can go somewhere with it. And so that's how I felt too. At any rate, do you want to?
When did I do it?
Yeah. So you and I also had the same
So I was the last year of the paper exam, which, what was that? Was it 96? Yeah, so I think I did it was 95 or 96. I can't remember which it was. Yeah.
The testing facility was a hockey rink. Seriously, JFK.
A hockey rink, that's a pretty good. Mine was the Dalton Valley Value Center, which was essentially an old, empty, fake Kmart, and it had 500 people filled with desks in June, and it was a heat wave, and they wouldn't let you stay in the building between exams because they didn't want you to cheat, and so we all had to go out into the parking lot and sit in like 104-degree weather in the parking lot. And Dalton, you probably don't know this about Chicago, Dalton is a southern suburb, and it's a very tough neighborhood, and so nobody wanted to leave because they didn't know like what would happen if there wasn't any restaurants around, or so everybody just stayed in their cars boiling in between, and then you'd go back in for the air conditioning, and it was a crazy, weird experience. But it was also a bonding experience because we did it together, and I had like 5 friends, and we all I remember going to have beer afterwards after the 4th day. We went out and went to this place. We all got beers, and we were like, "Oh, I can't believe this is great." We all had a beer. It's like, we fell asleep immediately. Yeah, we were all so unbelievably tired.
I think we have another question over here. Great. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree. Like, I'm now 31, going for my 4th exam of 6. So I definitely, every time I get into the questions, it's like, yeah, but there's complications in this, and like, what about this situation? It's much, much more difficult. So go for it right away. So yeah, maybe explain.
Do you have an idea of the average minutes per question? Like, it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, and do we have access to the correct answers after the test?
So, as you know, every exam has a different number of questions. They range from 65 to 100, and there's a different time frame that you have to complete the whole exam. But if you do the calculation, you have about 2.5 minutes on average per question. That doesn't mean you should start doing the math and by question 4, you've spent 10 minutes. Leave yourself some time at the end to review. There's also the case study questions take a little bit longer. So I like to tell people aim for a little less than 2 minutes per question as you're going through the discrete questions, and then you'll have some extra time for the case study questions. What was the second part of the question?
Feedback. Do you have answers?
Feedback. Not on the actual exam. You will just receive pass or fail, and if you fail, they'll tell you what sections you did poorly in, so you can kind of direct your studies. With our practice exams, you can look over every answer for every question. There's also detailed answer explanations for both correct and incorrect answers.
Let me just add a little bit onto that. So it's a really great question to think about, how many do I have to get right in order to pass, and that kind of thinking. I would also humbly say, so please take this with a grain of salt, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Do the best you can. Go as fast as you reasonably can. Get through as many of them as you reasonably can, which will be all of them. You'll be fine. A bunch of the questions you'll be able to go through in a minute, and then a bunch you'll be like, oh my God, I got to read this whole thing. Okay, that one takes 4 minutes. You know, all right, it'll balance out. Don't worry about that part. You don't know actually which questions are going to count. You get a bunch of questions, there's going to be a few sprinkled in there that are brand new questions that they're testing, and you're the guinea pig, and they're going to, all the people who take that, if 100% of the people get it right, they'll probably throw it out, it's too easy. If 5% of the people get it right, oh, that's way, way too hard, they'll throw that out. And so, like, some of the questions aren't even going to count against you. So again, don't worry about it. I will tell a quick little anecdote, which is for a very short period of time, until it just completely freaked everybody out, there was a period where you started taking the exam, let's say it was 100 questions and you had to get roughly a 70 on it or something. If you did the first 10 questions correctly, it would just stop, because the assumption was, oh, you got all first 10 right, we believe you already. Statistically, we know you're going to pass, don't worry about it, and it would just stop. It wouldn't tell you that, because the other possibility is you only got 1 or 2 correct or something, and it's statistically almost impossible for them to believe that you're going to pass it, and so it would stop at 10 at that point. And you didn't know which it was. I know a bunch of people who took it at that period, but I always think of that in that classic way, like, you don't know, don't worry about it. Like, just blow through it and you'll be fine.
Yeah, so I'd like to chime in on the strategy for taking the test. So for me, or actually I want to back up. So when you saw the example questions, that's the format of the actual test. So it's nice because you can skip questions, you can flag questions. So for me, I would go through and do the ones that I'm like, yeah, I know the answer to this, I can do this. So I would just kind of skip the ones that I didn't, I'd flag them to come back to. So I would start to feel better about it. And I'd be like, okay, I'm on a roll, I can answer these questions. And then at the end of it, I would come back, I'd maybe have, I don't know if you can still take a break, but at that point you could take a 10-minute break, step out, come back, and then I'd come back to my flagged questions. And I'd be like, okay, I know I have 45 minutes now. I'm going to sit down and try to do these tougher ones. And then you don't end up, because you could get stuck on a question and really be like, I've already spent 10 minutes on it. I need to figure it out. So there's some strategy there about, do you take the time to do it right away? Do you come back to it? So I would think through that as you're taking it and not get too deep into a question where you feel like you can't just skip it, because you can always skip it.
Can I just say one quick thing? So one thing I would add to that is I've heard people say that before, and I think that's a great approach. The other side, I've also heard people say, I want to go straight to the hard ones in order to kind of get a few done and know that I can get through them. And then I'm just going to bang out, and I know I can bang them out. And if I only have 20 minutes left, I know I can get through 40 of the easy ones. And the time pressure is actually useful for them. So my point is, know yourself. Understand how you take exams and how you feel in that situation. And the other key thing is remembering they're all worth the same point. So if there's one and you're like, I am struggling, skip on. And then you got a few minutes at the end, go back, see if you can answer it and take a guess,
Yeah, I don't know if we discussed this at all, but the different types of questions too. So there's the 10 questions at the end, or 10 to 15, I think it is, at the end of the exam that are more extensive. It gives you the kind of literature to kind of go through the backstory and all of that. I know some people that will go straight to those questions, and you're able to do that too. You're able to go to the harder ones, like Mike was saying. So yeah, any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
So when you're taking the exams, how important is it to have experience in those exam topics? For example, not having any experience in CE and then taking CE without any of that internship hour credit stuff. Is it crucial to have that?
Great question, yeah. I almost want to ask Trent about this. Can you answer it?
I mean, yeah, I can chime into that. The thing I'll say, I'll flip the question almost, and I did the opposite. If I knew I was going to take an exam and didn't have experience in that, I would go to leadership at work and say, hey, I don't have this right now, and I know, and I planned ahead. So I was like, in about a month or a month and a half, I'm going to take this exam. So can I get some experience in this? So who can I go to coffee with and tell me about it, or who can I go out on site with, or who can I do this to? And, you know, again, back to the firm investment piece, most of the time, if they see the initiative that you're doing this, they'll try and foster any of that in you that they can.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? Yeah. No, I did.
Yeah, if you haven't had the chance already, you should take a look at NCARB by the Numbers, which is a publication issued by NCARB that has the answer to this particular question and just a lot of statistics about the exams. And I would love to say that experience doesn't matter. Statistically, NCARB says that it does by a little bit. It gives you a little bit of a better shot at doing well on that particular division. And the way they studied that was looking at people's AXP hours compared, in particular subject matter, compared to the exam that they were about to take. So people who had the AXP hours in CE, for example, did a little bit better on CE than people who had none.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it definitely is helpful to have some experience on each of the topics, but I can also guarantee you, you're not going to have experience on each of the topics. It just, unless you wait until 20 years down the road. You know, I've been an architect for a long time, and there's still whole sections of the field I've never, you know, spent any time working in. So the trick is use it as a tool to talk to your firm and talk to the people you're working with in order to kind of get a chance to do the things that you want to do, and try to get as much of that experience as you can through that. And if you can't get it through that, then you know you're looking through the videos or the guidebooks or something like that. But you can also start to find other ways to get similar kinds of experience. Talking to people about how they would do something, going, you know, tagging along with somebody. You know, you can usually talk somebody in to, you know, okay, you'll carry the, you know, hard hats if I can get to go into the site and just listen to the conversation. A big part of it is just like having conversations with like the ownership, the administration of the firms, to just understand why they're choosing certain kinds of contracts, or why are they worried that, you know, when a contract comes back and there's like red marks on it, like what are they worried about? Which ones are they just going to accept, and which ones are they really thinking about? Like if you can have a conversation about that, you're going to start to understand how those things work. It's very hard abstractly to have like to just like read a contract and kind of get it. It's really easy to understand it once you see where people are worried, right? Suddenly it makes sense. You see the personality and the intimacy of what's being shown there, and then the words all fall into place. So you're looking for that kind of experience. It doesn't have to be a paid experience. You can find other ways to do it.
And as the AXP guy, I want to make sure that you're looking at setting O, other, okay, which is outside of your employment experience. And that has a lot of opportunities available for work with your mentor or someone other than your direct supervisor in the firm. And so if you're getting no traction in the office, you can go find a mentor or anyone else, mentor, okay, and arrange something with them that allows you to take credit for it as AXP and get the knowledge. So there are workarounds.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So then on the contrary, what would you say to someone who has been around too long without starting to take the AREs? I had my AXP completed before I even started my master's. And all I've heard are horror stories. So what should I do?
Tips, tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much over. I would just give up. Yeah, I don't know. Did you? Yeah. I'm going to come back. I'm kidding.
I have a different opinion. No, so you saw slide 1, don't panic, just do it. You know, it's never too late. You can start tomorrow, you can schedule an exam, and you can start studying, you know. It's like Mike was saying earlier, there's no one telling you when the right time to do it is, and there's no one saying you have to have it complete by now. So
I think that's where my problem lies, is that I'll just scream at her.
yeah.
and failed it and then panicked, and now I'm here. As I start to get into some of the real world past experiences and go, oh my God, and fill in the blanks of things that have happened in the past, and I don't know how to break myself of that from someone who's just out of school.
Do you have advice?
Can I respond? So I have a couple of quick things to say about it. So first of all, I was obviously joking. This is totally doable. It's going to completely work. Don't worry. Don't panic. The problem is panicking. And I could give you a million stories about people panicking and that causing their trouble. The trick here, and this is a mindset thing, the trick, and this is true for everybody, but especially for you, the trick is you read the question and then you say to yourself, what does NCARB or the AIA think the correct answer is? Not what is the correct answer. And if you say that to yourself every time, then it starts becoming a mantra, it starts becoming built in, and eventually you're not even saying it anymore because you're already looking at the question like, what are they trying to get at? What do they want me to say? Not what do I think they're going to, is going to be the right thing to say. So I can give you 1,000 examples of things that I say to students and in situations like this all the time. Something like when you're on the job site, you never talk about safety on the job site. That is verboten. You absolutely don't do that. That is the contractor's world. That is their responsibility. If you do it, you're quite likely to take on somebody else's liability. You do not do that. I bet 50 times on a job site I've looked around and said, are you guys crazy? That's ridiculous. That's dangerous. What are you doing? Why is that guy walking on top of a brick wall dismantling it? Like, that's crazy. He should be wearing a harness. Like, I know the people. I'm going to say what I need to say, but I know what the right response is on the exam, which is lips are sealed. I might talk to the owner. I might have a very clever conversation with the GC that says, I see there are issues of something, like I would put it into context, but in real life, these are people and you have relationships and they're two different worlds. Answering the question is, what does the AIA and NCARB think you should answer? And if you can keep that in your mind, it'll blow you right by all of that kind of baggage that you're bringing to it. It's really an important part to it. For the younger folks, it's still a good idea, but for them, they're bringing less baggage, and so it's not as important, if you will.
Also, too, do you have access to colleagues, friends in that you can do a study group with in some sort of way? That's something to seek out. So again, NCARB by the numbers, it's really important to see what they're doing. Yeah. What they say frequently, NCARB has said, is it's the thing that does show a really large statistical advantage is actually studying with people, not for content, but for understanding how to feel about the exam and approach it, master yourself, and do it. So what I suggest, and many people are in smaller firms who may not have anyone testing at this point, invite yourself to Smith Group. Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, we're very friendly, okay, and seriously. And so if you find, that, if you ask, hey, are you in a study group? And I say, yes, you'll say, do you mind if I come over during lunch? Sure. So I think that there are ways to find people to surround yourself with that will help you.
I've got two quick pieces of advice that are particularly for you, that somebody that's been working a lot and wants to practice not applying that outside knowledge to questions, but they're really going to be helpful, I think, for anyone. The first one is obviously practice taking the questions and taking exams and practice the questions. And when you're evaluating your answers, ask yourself every single time, did I apply some outside information to this question, and is that why I got it wrong? Because you're going to be susceptible to that. The other thing that I would suggest is practice writing your own questions. I think if you do, you don't have to do a ton of it, but if you do it, you'll quickly realize, and I write questions almost every day, you'll quickly realize that it's hard to write wrong answers that seem correct. And when you practice it on your own, you're going to start to spot out what somebody had to do to make this answer kind of make sense, and what they added to a question to make you think that, and those distractors. Like, it's really good practice.
That right there was worth the price of admission. That was a great answer right there.
I just want to say I totally agree about like when you read a question, it is so hard because like we're all training to be architects or are architects, and you have to think about 10 million things when you're answering a single question. But when you're taking the ARE exams, you're only thinking about what they're telling you. So I always had to tell myself, whoa, back up. We're not talking like that site design one. We're not talking about rainwater strategies. Like we're only talking about how much pavement, how much of this, like what percentage of this site is covered, so just always step back and be like, what do I know in the world of ARE, this question?
Can I just add a little bit to that? Yeah. So that is absolutely true. There is a slight caveat to it, which is you only read what's in the question, and that's all the information you want to use for to answer that question. Except every once in a while, you're bringing a little bit of code information in, and so part of going through the questions and getting good at taking the practice exams is just starting to get a feel for what are the kinds of issues that you're supposed to just know going in, and what are the kinds of issues that it's only what it tells me. That's all I know. Because often on the questions, you want to fill in more information. You want to start thinking about which way is the water flowing across the site, or which, you want to bring that in, and you're trying to stop yourself. But there are certain kinds of issues that you want to start getting a feel for that you do bring to the exam. But only a few, and you'll get a feel for it pretty fast.
Okay. Trent has a question.
Joe's question made me think of another question that I know I've talked to Eric a lot about, and I've talked to Nikki a lot about, and that's a little bit about fail culture and like failing these exams. And yes, it's a cost, but every person I've talked to, except for literally only one person, has failed an exam. So like the idea that, once you fail, it's not over. Like, I don't know, for me, like raise your hand if you failed one. Yeah. See, I'm guessing that's most people who's testing, but like I don't know. That was huge for me too, to figure out like, oh, everybody's failed. Like, I don't know.
Definitely. Question. Awesome. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
We all have opinions, yeah.
I hate using it depends for everybody, but that's kind of the answer here. But I think if you're in school and you've got not so much work experience under your belt, I would probably take PCM and PJM first, mostly because I think those are the exams that you can practice management
and project management.
Right. I think, but if you think about practice management, you're not going to you can't get the experience of managing a practice unless you're licensed. So you're never going to have that experience before you take the exam. So study for it. It's a lot of firm financials and a couple of insurance and legal structures, but it's short. It's 65 questions. It's pretty approachable. Project management is a similar thing. I mean, you're probably not going to manage projects unless you've got a good amount of experience or you're licensed. So that's another one that you can study for, and I think do pretty well on. From there, I would take them in order, like Mike was saying before, in the order that they sort of appear on a construction project.
So I think just for clarity and for the sort of overall punch of the overall event here, Chris, you're wrong. I would say PA first, of the four in sequence. I would start there and then find the time once I feel comfortable for project management and practice management. I'm, of course, kidding. It doesn't matter which way you do it. The reason I'm throwing that out there is I think your school experience is probably most like PA and PPD. And so it can be very useful if what you're doing is kind of in the realm of the kind of work you're used to, and you get a win, like you kind of feel confident, and then you can go into something like practice management that is probably pretty alien, trying to line up who's working on what project and how I'm going to get the correct, structural consultant onto a project. Like, those are kind of weird questions to ask somebody who's 25, but once you feel confident in how those things go, it's easy to then step back into those questions. In actuality, I would also do it the way that Chris did it, because I just think that just straight through is the logical way to go. But I think there's other ways you can come up with it. The key there is come up with your game plan and then just do it. Don't look back. Doesn't matter. Like, you could do any order. I'll give you a quick little aside. When I took it was done differently. It was silos, it was structures and mechanical and stuff like that back when I took it. And when I took the mechanical one, I went into it thinking, oh my God, I don't know anything about mechanical systems. I am totally going to fail. I had studied for everything else. I hadn't studied for mechanical. I just hadn't had time. I'd run out of time. I was like, well, I'll take the exam and see how it goes, and I'll take it again next year and I'll know more about it at least. And I took the exam and I passed it. And I was like, how the hell did I pass that exam? Guess what I teach now?
And I think a really interesting thing that we're also seeing now is in Michigan, when they created IPAL, they changed the law to indicate that you can take the tests as soon as you graduate from high school, okay? Meaning that you don't even have to sit for any of the classes yet. What I've seen in my students that I talk to is that many are in various places in their test taking or their coursework. So for instance, be careful, I would say, regarding taking, for instance, professional practice classes like PM, the project management one and the practice management one, before you've had the class. You might do just fine. I think Trent did fine. Did you have your class first or did you have the test first? Okay, good. You might do just fine. But on the other hand, and Dale actually is concerned about this, it's an odd situation to pass the exam before you've had the class, which puts academia in an interesting spot, actually, at that point. And so I think, take it with a grain of salt, it might be useful to have some knowledge from the school first. I don't know. I think a lot of it depends on what affinity you feel for the material in the exam.
So, just from my perspective, the books, it's very clear which chapters are longer. So I did the short ones first, and that was the first two and the last one, which
data-driven answer. There
yeah,
you go.
Which honestly, they kind of complemented each other because they were all relating to like AIA documents, so you could study that and understand the documents, take those exams, and then after that I was like, okay, now I'm ready to like really dive into this and study like the thick sections of the book. So I don't know, for what it's worth.
And funny enough, I actually did the PA first, passed, felt great. I had that experience. Yep, it was awesome.
So what other resources are essential to the tests? Like, obviously the code is going to be very important and the AIA contracts, but like, are there any other big things outside of the like practice material books that you used?
Great question.
I'm sure we all have.
I think everyone should go around for that one.
Yeah. So I had this book called the Architecture Student's Handbook.
It's a great book.
And is that by the AIA? I don't know.
No, that's Alan.
Yeah, and that was great because there was stuff I'd studied and I'd be like, what does that term mean? Like the couple lines in the text I was reading didn't really add up. So then I'd read this other document and that really helped. And then the AIA. And honestly, I think those were the three things I studied. It was the textbook, the student handbook, and the AIA documents.
Yeah, the AIA Handbook for Professional Practice, which I think is probably the book you're talking about. I mean, essentially 50 or 60% of two of the exams come straight out of that book. So there's tons of information in there. It's totally worth, if you don't have it, somebody you know has it, and that's a great one. I think the handbook one the Studio Companion one is a great one. Another book that I love, and I'm going to always forget the name, Sun, Wind, and Light. Sun, Wind, and Light, I think is a fantastic book because it's got these great, simple little drawing diagrams that you want to talk about convective current or anything like that. It's right there. It just lays it out for you. So simple. It's a beautiful, simple little book. It's great to have. The Ching books are still fantastic and like very accessible. You're not really reading them. You're not starting in the beginning and reading through, but they're just useful. Like you saw something in a question, you go and look, and you'll find some information, and it'll build up. And each of them has a different way of looking at the topics, and you start putting them together, and it starts to make sense. The other book that I mentioned earlier, which is like the most boring book ever, is MEEB, the Mechanical and Electrical Equipment for Buildings, MEEB. You will never start at page 1 and read it. It's not for that. It's a reference book. But if you take the MEEB book and you just go through and look at the photos and the diagrams and read the captions, like, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about. Oh yeah, I know what they're talking about. I have no idea what okay, I read that little section. I sort of poke around for a while there, and then I can keep going. It's a great way to get a feel for mechanical systems because you'd be surprised how much you know, and it's useful to kind of give yourself a sense of what you should really keep looking around for. I'm sure there's a bunch more, but you're probably going to say them.
I think you nailed them all. I mean, that's what I would go for. About Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice, I have that open probably on my computer right now, and I don't think I ever close it, except when I shut down my computer. It's just always open. You'll use it throughout your career, and the student version is free, and it has substantially the same information as the paid version. So definitely get that.
I actually think it's better in certain ways.
Concise.
The student version, it's more concise. The professional one, it tries to teach you everything, and I think it has too much in it. I think the student one is clearer and better.
Yeah, and the Ching books that you mentioned, I mean, I would bet that if you work in an office that your office has that book. If they don't, I would look for another office. I don't know, but they should have that book. So use that. It's a great resource. Even while you're working, it's a fantastic resource. And then a lot of I would definitely get some of the books that are listed in the AIA handbook that are the primary resources for the exam. And I don't know that there's a right answer about which ones to get, but get the ones that you're interested in. Some of them are, I think the lowest price one is $25. They're not all $300 books. Get a few that you're interested in. Start your architectural library. These aren't just exam books. They're great books that you'll use, throughout your career.
And I think this comes down to learning styles too. What we would advocate in our classes is that you not just read passively, but that you interact actively with the material in some way. As an example, when I was studying, actually before the test, I took the contract and I rewrote the whole thing and summarized it all. Now that's obsessive, but on the other hand, I knew the contract. So I do think that a style of learning that helps you embed the knowledge in your head serves the goal of this really being a recap of your entire education, and also gives you a pretty good confidence level that you know it. So I would say active learning in some sort of way that really grabs the information.
I think that sounds like a great idea, and it also sounds very obsessive. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you all so much, and thank you all for being here. Maybe, Trent, if you want to say some kind of last final words here.
Sure, I can. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So this was like a first test with engaging Black Spectacles with LTU and the AIA, and like a big bridge of all of these groups. And thank you, everyone, for all the support. Thank you, Black Spectacles, for coming, to all of our panelists, to LTU for hosting us, and hopefully this was helpful. If you have any feedback, send it to me. I probably personally emailed most of you in this room, so I'd be happy to hear it. But thank you again to everyone. We really appreciate it.